Hey everybody, we're back for the balance breakdown. Ian O'Neill and Harry Powell. We're kind of taking up this slot from the takeaways. Spencer did such an excellent job at that, and we wish him all the best. We wanted to keep this content there for you guys, for the lads on the big podcasts. I know it helps them out as well. But basically, what me and Harry are going to do each and every Tuesday is we're going to take a deep dive into the UFC cards, mainly the UFC cards, but on occasions we might look at Cage Warriors, we may look at Bellator, we may have a little conversation here or there about the cards, but we will be with you today for the latest UFC installment, UFC Fight Night. Sergei Pavlovich, who went out there and took out Curtis Blaydes in just one round, Harry. And, you know, let's just get straight into it here. We'll be with you for the next hour or so. We're going to deep dive into these fights, talk tactics, talk analysis, and maybe talk a little bit about what's next as well. Harry, how are you today, sir? It's the balance breakdown. We are back, baby. We are back for where we started from.
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Just as a bit of a brief background, I suppose, on why we've picked this name. Obviously, Spencer's decided to take his content back to the Keyboard Kimura, and you know we love him very dearly and wish him all the best. And you know these podcasts will still align, both the SevereMMA podcasts and the stuff that Keyboard Kimura pulls out will still be closely aligned. You know, there's certainly no malice or anything there. We certainly love Spencer just as much as we did before. And you know, you'll still see him on the State of the UFC, and you'll still see him all over those sorts of places. But we changed the name, one as a nod to Spencer, but the takeaways was his idea. It was his name. It was, you know, whatever. So the balance breakdown is actually where Ian and I first met. I used to run a podcast channel called the All About Balance podcast. It was an interview based, you know, type of thing. That's where I first met Shawnee properly as well. And I started to branch off and do some of the fight type breakdown things. And I called it the balance breakdown just as an easy arm. And then there was this gentleman on Twitter, and his name was Ian O'Neill. And I was following him for a little while there, and he was putting out some really interesting things. And I needed somebody to come and do the podcast with us, because a couple of the boys that I did it with originally fell out, and Ian O'Neill was in. And so the balance breakdown really began. And here we are back again.
Back again on the SevereMMA YouTube channel and in your ears as well. And it's great to be back. Look, I think it's important to give you the platform to do what you do best, and that's analyze fights, that's break it down. You have such a unique way at looking at the fights that, you know, I'm excited to get this going. And let's talk about the main event, Harry. Sergei Pavlovich. Look, we were talking on the preview show about this fight, and we were curious to see Sergei Pavlovich tested, because this was his toughest test to date against Curtis Blaydes, who had come in a rich vein of form. He got himself back on the horse, obviously, after losing to Derek Lewis, coming back. Obviously got the win against Jairzinho Rosenstruck, got the win against Dawkins, Tom Aspinall, unlucky enough to get injured. But it was a big test for Curtis Blaydes as well, in Sergei Pavlovich, who was coming out having lost his debut against Alistair Overeem, and then kind of went on a little bit of a knockout spree. And that didn't change on Saturday night. And I guess the biggest talking point we had going in there was if Curtis Blaydes is going to want to stand and bang with someone like Sergei Pavlovich, or will he look to take the fight down? And look, there was a lot of people up in arms on Twitter and stuff like that, saying that, you know, Curtis Blaydes was silly and stupid and didn't fight a great game plan. Kind of along the same lines myself, but a little less harshness, because there was stages he did try to take it down, but he simply was unable to. Let's get straight into it. What's your thoughts on the actual performance itself from Sergei Pavlovich and Curtis Blaydes, Harry?
So I thought that Curtis Blaydes fought 75% of exactly the type of fight he needed to. I've got some notes in front of me, and I've got some timestamps on them, and we'll run through sort of the main bulk of those as I think it paints the fight in quite a nice direction. But from an overarching perspective, Curtis Blaydes did kind of exactly what he needed to, in that he allowed Pavlovich to come on to him, meaning Pavlovich isn't one of these guys that's going to glide across the octagon and throw these beautifully crisp, well feinted behind, well set up shots. He's a guy that's got piston hands and he throws them exactly like that. It's as if he's got like big Atlas stones in his hands, right? And he fucking bowls them at people and puts people away, right? So Curtis Blaydes having that range, enacting some range management with the teeps, with the jab, with the interference of the lead hand was perfect. And he caught Pavlovich early a number of times with some straight right hands. And that I thought was brilliant, really excellent game planning and really excellent execution of a game plan. So the first note I have is that 4:18 left on the clock. Now, I'll just say this now because it's easier to say this once, and we may say it every time we do the podcast. But if you want to go back and watch along, obviously we're not licensed to use the fight material here. If we were, we would be. But right now, I make a note, and what I'm going to be doing is making a note. I pause the recording, check the timing when a sequence begins, and then that's easy enough for people to follow along if they want to, right? So 4:18 on the clock, and I say that this is the naivety of Pavlovich. Blaydes pumps a jab and then starts to reset. As Pavlovich loads up, he leans down to his left. That's the biggest tell in the game, right? And we know that when the lean to the left comes down, what's happening? A big overhand right is coming. And so as he throws up the overhand right, Curtis Blaydes very quickly covers with his left hand, brings that elbow up to the sky to make sure that his bicep and his forearm are in the way to take most of the concussive blow. And he knows that Pavlovich is going to rise his head back up to the center line. It's probably going to be a left hook or it's going to be something similar. So that center line is going to be exposed. What does Blaydes do? Slams a right hook immediately in there. Just gorgeous timing, gorgeous awareness of the position. And he does that a number of times. 4:13 on the clock now. He does exactly the same thing. Sets his feet off to the left flank, sees Pavlovich coming up, sticks a right hand on him. Those two, and the third one comes at 4:02, right? But the thing that resonated with me in that moment is now Pavlovich understands that in the striking realm, he has to respect Blaydes a little. Maybe he doesn't respect his power immediately because he's taken 3 clean right hands, but hasn't been rocked, hasn't been wobbled, but knows that there's something coming back, knows he can't just wander over to the other side of the cage and bulldoze this dude. And you see that reflected in the changing of his footwork. He actually looks to start putting a jab out there. He looks to start moving his feet a little. The tactical error that I have, and I'll throw it back to you just so you can give me your opinion on those things, but the tactical error I think that happened outside of that first minute of great performance from Blaydes is now you need to show the versatility. Now you need to, and what we said in the preview show was we need to then show some down blocking, show some feints. Every feint that comes has to end with, I'm looking at your leg, I'm going to check that knee, I'm going to try and bring you onto your right foot forward so that I can look towards that side. I want to throw a kick or I throw a teep and I'm going to look to level change. You have to show Pavlovich that there is more now. You've gained some level of respect on the feet inside that first minute. Now let's capitalize on that. And he didn't do that.
Yeah, and like a couple of very good points there that I'll just piggyback off of. And I think the main one, Harry, that I'd like to focus on is that success of Curtis Blaydes early in the fight on the feet. Now, whether that's Pavlovich starting off slow or whatnot, but that little tiny bit of success can really strew your game plan. You're going out there, you're nervous. How am I going to act on the feet? Am I going to be able to get off my shots? And Curtis Blaydes was able to get off his shots, really. And that can kind of lead you down to a false sense of security, which I guess we kind of will see further along the fight as you explain it. But we talked on the preview show, and I think generally speaking, you're going to hear us talking about a guy who's relatively known for his grappling, who's been very successful with his grappling in the past. And he was coming in against a power puncher. And what I always like to see in that scenario is for guys to play it relatively safe early days. Like, we're in a 25-minute fight here. Come in, close the distance, get him in the clinch, get arms working of Pavlovich, get the blood into his arms, take some of the pop out of his punches. When we're looking at a guy like Sergei Pavlovich, we're looking at a guy who's had multiple first round finishes. I mean, the man hasn't been let me check here. The guy hasn't been outside of the first round since 2017, outside of the UFC. I think, you know, you've got to be looking to bring that to the later stages. You know, the fight in itself was finished at around the 308 mark in round one. But would you kind of agree with that? Like, we can see that sometimes in fights where, look, at you have a little bit of success early and you kind of buy into that success a little bit as well. And I think Curtis Blaydes kind of bought into his success early on the feet, and it ended up costing him in the long run.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I'd need to hear what he says specifically, but it certainly felt like I've landed 3 big right hands in 16 seconds here. Pavlovich was forced to reset a number of times, which is great. But then, to me, if I was in Blaydes' corner, the game plan that we would have been working on in camp would have been to allow Pavlovich to come forward, but allow there to be a range dictation on our side. And he did that so well for the first minute. And like you say, maybe it is that when he landed those shots, he's like, well, I could make a huge statement here. And the huge statement could be, I've landed big shots on this guy. I can continue landing big shots as long as I keep to this game plan. And then I can jump on the mic and say, sure, look, your big power puncher that's not been outside the first round, I just finished him in the first round from strikes on the feet. Now, again, we'd need to ask Curtis that question as to whether his mindset changed. But the adjustment that Pavlovich made was what won him the fight. And the adjustment that he made essentially is just putting a jab out there. So I've referenced here at 355, Blaydes is fighting perfectly other than not shooting inside this minute and change.
Even a simple level change at that stage. I mean, when we're talking about initiating grappling, we're not even talking about, you know, fully initiating. Sometimes you're just level changing. You're maybe clinching, trying to land off the clinch. You're trying to break up the rhythm that you've created, number one, and trying to break up the rhythm that your opponent is trying to make as well. And yeah, I was very disappointed. Look at it. There was some brief exchanges there that Pavlovich shucked off, but I do feel that Curtis Blaydes could have been a little bit more aggressive in trying to level change, break up the play, mix it up a bit. I think you explained it perfectly. Mixing it up is important. I think he may have fell into the striking trap here, as you say, but Pavlovich started to get off his jab, and that was the beginning of the end really for Curtis Blaydes after that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that there are like the grappling exchanges that we did see were desperation grappling exchanges. They were grappling exchanges coming after Curtis had shots landed on him. And I mentioned this at it's sort of 3:29 left on the clock, right? And Blaydes is with a period of edging and head movement. What do I mean by edging and head movement? What I mean is Curtis is pretty flat-footed, which is fine. There's not a problem there. And he's edging himself into distance and he's moving his head off the center line, back in, off the center line, back in. His hands are a little wider and he's essentially asking Pavlovich to make a decision. Is Pavlovich going to allow Curtis to enter the pocket? Is he going to retreat from the pocket? Is he going to try and jam Curtis with a big shot coming in? What's the option that Pavlovich is going to take? And Curtis can then obviously react based on that option. But he lands a jab and a low kick. And I think this shows again that there's sort of a one-dimensional nature to Pavlovich. And that's if he's not moving forward and landing big shots, you can get to him, right? And I think my overarching, maybe this is a hot take, maybe it's not, but my overarching feeling coming out of this fight is that Pavlovich is a very one-dimensional fighter. And yes, okay, he went in there and he stuffed the takedowns from Blaydes and he won the exchanges and certainly won the fight in the latter part of the first round. But there are moments in that first minute and a half where Curtis Blaydes shows you the blueprint on how to beat somebody like Pavlovich. And I mentioned that the change was the piston jab. And I'm going to just reference what I said here. In the last two exchanges, this is 3:11 on the clock. In the last two exchanges, Pavlovich is just beating Blaydes to the punches. This isn't a footwork win. He's just circling a little better than Blaydes is. And he's he's finding a home for the jabs and right hands. He then lands a massive right hand over the top, dropping Blaydes. And that's really the beginning of the end. Because from here, he's smelling blood. The one thing I will say that I think gave us a slight look into Pavlovich's mentality in this fight was when we watched him against Taito Ivasa and Derek Lewis, what we saw is when he had his man hurt, he took a step back, he angled off, he split his stance properly, and he found the shots to put his man away. In this fight, the first time he swarmed Curtis Blaydes. Sorry, I was going to call him Sergei Pavlovich. That's not right. The time he swarmed Curtis Blaydes the first time, his feet were like double shoulder width apart. He was just swinging from the hips, swinging from the fences, and Curtis was able to roll with the shots, pick his hands up, tuck his chin, move his head out, and he actually angled off the first time. And I wasn't super impressed with the way that he picked his shots when he actually finished the fight to drop Curtis Blaydes to the turtle. And that's something I would like to have somebody ask Sergei Pavlovich about, right? Is what changed? Was it that this is the main event that possibly puts you in contention to be the backup for the main event between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic as and when that happens? Is this because this is the moment? This is the first round. I've got him hurt. It's Curtis Blaydes. This is the biggest fight of my career. Is that the momentum running through you? Because when we saw him against Taito Ivasa and Derek Lewis, frankly, the most impressive part of the entire fights were those closing sequences when he was able to take a step back, assess the situation in front of him, and pick those shots, because that shows a level of cerebral focus that you don't see from many fighters, especially not a heavyweight when they have a guy hurt. And so I'd like to know where that dissipated from in this fight. But either way, and this is again my argument about the 75% thing for Curtis Blaydes, is Pavlovich makes an adjustment in that first round to say, okay, when I'm coming in with big overarching hooks and big slams, he's being able to counter me because he's quicker and he's a bit more experienced and he knows what he's doing on the feet. Well, okay, let me just put a jab in his face then. And if that single adjustment is enough to take that first round away from Curtis Blaydes, then I'm sorry, but the versatility and the awareness that Pavlovich has isn't enough. Why is, and I don't mean to shit on Curtis Blaydes, that's not what I'm saying at all, but in almost every fight, I will generally pick the more well-rounded fighter because they have more tools with which to affect the fight. Well, why is Curtis Blaydes not addressing the lead hand of Pavlovich and showing him that there's a takedown available? Why is he not, as you say, changing levels? Why is it that when he lands those first three right hands, he doesn't fake the right hand and go to a double leg? Why is it that, there's just, those are the questions that I need answered here. Because as a perennial title contender in Curtis Blaydes, this was a fight in that first minute. I felt like, oh, he's going to win this. Like, he has got every chance to win this. And then 2 minutes later, we see him, getting stopped by referee. So
yeah, and it's kind of sad times for Curtis Blaydes as well. It leaves him in somewhat limbo when it comes to title contention. There, we've got a lot of young and up and comers. Is he going to fall into that gatekeeper status? Does he have one more left in him? This one will hurt Curtis Blaydes because he would have had a new lease of life, with fresh blood up at the top of the division. Francis Ngannou is gone. I mean, looking at the performance of Sergei Pavlovich, everyone was calling for that Jon Jones fight. I mean, it was impressive. It was a good adjustment, but I do like to compare performances based off of what I seen against Jon Jones. And I mean, if Jon Jones is still there and if Sergei Pavlovich is the man standing across the way from him, I'm not sure if Sergei can cause him any problems whatsoever. I think Jones would likely put him on the back foot, make him feel uncomfortable, and I don't think we'd have to wait too long to see a takedown for Jon Jones as well. And that's just the key. Do you think with Curtis Blaydes, the fact that, they kept showing, what really resonated with me on the night, they kept showing the replay of his finish against Alistair Overeem with those ferocious elbows. And I mean, if you're capable of that, why not bring it down there? I'm wondering, we see from time to time wrestlers come in there and fall in love with their striking. And I'm wondering if kind of Curtis Blaydes has kind of fallen into that trap a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see what's next for him. Any final thoughts on that fight, Harry, before we move on? Who would you like? Look, at everyone was calling for Jones next for Sergei Pavlovich, but he's not going to get Jon Jones next. That fight isn't happening with Stipe for many months. I think at best he'll be a backup for that fight, but I'd imagine the UFC will be looking to stick him in there. Maybe if Tom Aspinall gets another win, they could have them kind of fight off for true number one contender status. What would you like to see next, or what do you expect to see next?
Yeah, so I think what I'd like to see is Pavlovich John Jones, frankly. Simply because he's done enough. He's done enough. What do I think we will see? I suspect what we'll see is Tom Aspinall will come back and he will fight somebody. I don't think it will be a Cyril Gagné. I don't think it will be somebody of that ilk. I don't think it'll be somebody of that level. It'll be somebody just below that, right? And then after that, I suspect we will see John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. I suspect John Jones wins that fight. And then I don't know that I see Stipe Miocic sticking around. If John Jones is honest in his assessment that this is going to be his last fight, well, then I think they do Tom Aspinall versus Sergei Pavlovich for the heavyweight title. I suspect that's what we will see. There are obviously some question marks around Jailton Almeida and where he's going to be and what he's going to do. I don't know. But as it stands, I think John Jones, when he beats Stipe, is going to be able to jump on the mic and say, I'm a double champ. I beat the best heavyweight of all time. I've done it all. I'm the best ever, etc., etc. And then if he wants to, he could walk away into the distance. Now, if he wanted to, he could also keep the belt and defend it more time, or attempt to defend it more times than Stipe did, and then do the whole I'm the best heavyweight in the world and the best light heavyweight in the world of all time, etc., etc. But I don't know. It took us a long time to get to this perspective where John Jones is actually in the cage at 265. And so I don't know how much we do see of him at 265. I suspect it's certainly a labor on his body, carrying around the extra weight, regardless of how long it took him to transform his body. And he's also getting older. He's a father, he's a husband, he's all of these things. Those all take tolls on your life. And so, yeah, I don't know. But that's what I expect to see. I expect to see Tom Aspinall, Sergei Pavlovich for a vacant UFC title at some point.
Yeah, I do too. That's where I can kind of lay my thoughts down after the fight as well. I think really, we'll probably see that for a title or an interim title somewhere over the next course of the year, depending on what John Jones. The ball is in John Jones's court as to what happens in the heavyweight division, and it'll be interesting to see what does happen. Moving on to the co-main event, the last time Brad Tavares was knocked out was 2015 against Robert Whittaker, no less. He came into this fight with Bruno Silva, off the back of a loss to Dricus du Plessis. Look at Dricus is competing at the highest level in the division right now. He, strangely enough, is matched up at Robert Whittaker in his next fight. But Bruno Silva came out there and done exactly what Robert Whittaker did all the way back in 2015. It was Brad Tavares' first knockout loss.
2019 Edmund Shabazian.
Oh, Shabazian got one. Excuse me. That skipped me. Yeah. Shabazian hit him with the left head kick. Bruno Silva hit him with the knee on Saturday night, and the fight was over. What are your thoughts on that performance from Bruno Silva? It was a co-main event that doesn't really have too much jeopardy on it. I can't see either one of these guys making a run. Obviously, Bruno Silva, he'll be delighted with the win. It was a big win and a big slot for him. So maybe he'll get a top 15 level opponent next. It'll be interesting to see. But look, he came out here and got the job done, and a finish over Brad Tavares nonetheless is quite impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a fan of Brad Tavares' style. I think he's a clever fighter. He's a well put together fighter. Always comes in shape. Always comes with a good game plan. And I feel like we saw that. Like the first thing he throws is at 4:56. So 4 seconds in, they've met in the middle. And the first thing he throws is he takes a really nice step to his left-hand side, angles off that left foot, pivots on that left foot with a left hook, and then lands, looks at him and says, go on, what next? And so you don't see that. You don't see angle changes and pivots and check left hooks and whatever from fighters that don't know what they're doing, right? Now, the entire story of this fight is outside foot battle. That's the read here, right? The read here is when you're fighting as an orthodox fighter, and that's what Brad Tavares was, and you're fighting a southpaw fighter, the outside foot battle is what wins you fights. I first heard about outside foot battles when I was watching Floyd Mayweather box, right? And people were talking about it then, and I didn't really understand what it meant. And then the more that it was pointed out to me, the more it became blindingly obvious, right? What I mean is, when you're standing in an orthodox stance, it means your left foot is forward. If your partner is standing in a southpaw stance, he's put his right foot is forward, meaning he's essentially mirroring your stance. You're looking at yourself in a mirror, right? Both of your power hands are now on the same side. Left for the southpaw fighter, right for the orthodox fighter, generally, right? You might find that you've got a rare occurrence where you've got a southpaw fighter and their right hand is their power hand and vice versa. But generally, that's the way it is, right? You generally don't move toward the side of the power, right? Generally, you move away from that side. You circle off away from it. So if you're the right-sided fighter, you need to step to the outside of your partner's foot. Similarly, if you're an orthodox fighter. All of the success that Brad Tavares was having was when he was winning the outside foot battle. There was a number of occasions where he was pressed up against the fence a little on the cage line behind that tram line that we speak about all the time on the preview show. And then he explodes out, breaking the distance and doing those sorts of things. However, for the most part, the success that Bruno Silva had was equally. It was when he was finding his way to the outside foot battle victories and he was landing there. The shots that caused the eventual break came from Bruno Silva standing to the right-hand side, landing a left hand, the following knee, and then puts him away with the final shot. But I just want to run through some of the notes that I have here. There's a nice right high kick from Tavares at 340. However, because he was lax on the footwork, and this is the outside foot battle, right? He throws that right high kick. Bruno Silva chucks up his left hand and blocks the kick, fine, no problem. But because as Brad replaces his right foot, he isn't aware of what's happening with the left foot. Bruno Silva takes a step to the outside. His right foot is level on the outside space of Brad Tavares's. And that's not like a small outside foot battle win. That's a dominant, I've just destroyed this outside foot battle. Your footwork is horrendous here in comparison to mine. And lands a left hand right down the pipe. The center channel is available, and the clean left comes, and that's really where the danger is, right? That's what you're attempting to glean when you take the step off the center line and you win the outside battle. You're exposing your partner's center line whilst protecting your own. Yourself is no longer on a center line, whereas your partner's is available, and that's what we saw with the left hand. Tavares shows the importance on his side of the footwork battle at 312, so not that far afterwards. He bursts out of the tightness with a leaping angle and a left hook, exactly the same as he did to the front, and then lands a body kick for some change. And so what we're seeing here is a recurring theme, which is what you're going to see. And this fight is a really good example, as I said earlier, of if you're a southpaw fighter and an orthodox fighter and you want to see how to win fights, go and watch the lead foot of both fighters. Because, and just as we get to the finish here, I'll just read what I've written. The last exchanges have become a little bit more wild and sloppy. Left hand, right hook over the top from Silva, a range reset and another outside foot battle victory as a big left hand lands from Silva, a right hand also. Tavares now has lost his stance awareness because he's hurt and is square up against the cage. That's the worst thing, right? Losing a footwork battle is one thing. Having no footwork to battle with is another thing, right? That lacking stance awareness means that Silva lands the second left hand as Brad Tavares fires back with the left hook. Silva's already on the inside space, and Brad has essentially given Silva a plum clinch or a tie clinch, whichever one you want to call it. This leads to the eventual plum clinch where Silva obviously gets the proper plum clinch. The reaction at 253 is the same. Right knee lands flush. Left hook grazes the chin, squares up Tavares, and the right hand crushes him. For Silva, the thing that was impressive to me, and I'll chuck it over to you as I've just spoke for 1100 minutes, is
I'll keep it going.
the thing that was impressive to me is he was just patient. You know, Tavares started well. I think Tavares was better than Silva thought he was. And he sort of grows into the fight, makes his reads, takes a couple licks, sees what Tavares has got. And he actually sees the knee at 253 left on the clock. he lands the 1-2, and then Silva looks for a left hand and throws a knee up the middle, and Tavares just moves his head out of the way. But he's made a mental note, and he's like, okay, cool, the knee is available because his head positioning isn't amazing after he's thrown his shots. And so we see that 3 minutes later. We'll see the same thing when we talk about Montel Jackson. It's all the same thing. These fighters, whether we think they're great fighters or not, they're making mental notes. A lot of them making mental notes, logging reactions, and then capitalizing on those reactions as and when they get the opportunity to. And that's exactly what happened here for Bruno Silva. To finish for Brad Tavares is one thing. To finish him in the first round is another thing. And to finish him in the fashion that he did is another thing. I was very impressed by Bruno Silva's performance.
Yeah, there's not too much more that I can add to that. I was impressed as well. I think that's all good, brother. You can explain it much better than I can anyway, so it's all good. Yeah, I think just that statement alone of getting Brad Tavares out there. Look, at Brad Tavares wasn't happy with the finish. I thought the ref did well to come in there. I think it would have not been good for Brad Tavares had he been let fight on there. Whether that's Bruno Silva lands some shots or whether he gets back up. I think at that stage of the fight, I think you agree by your nod in your because you're nodding your head. I think Bruno Silva had just got his number. He had won the foot battle. He started to figure Brad Tavares out. So I thought it was an excellent performance. What's next for Bruno Silva? I don't know. Maybe it's someone on the bottom of the top 15. Maybe it's another guy outside. I don't know. I don't think we're going to see Bruno Silva go too far one way or another. But one person that I think we might see go far. Oh, no, excuse me. I was going to go to Jasmin Lucindo, but we forgot that we have Bobby Green and Jared Gordon. We got to see a good chunk of this fight before it was finished. Obviously, Bobby Green clashed heads with Jared Gordon. It was an accidental clash of heads. The fight was ruled a no contest. These guys will likely run it back again. But what we did see of the fight was, we saw Bobby Green moving forward, fighting with his hands down, very elusive on the feet. And I feel we saw Jared Gordon, who was a little bit frustrated, a little bit confused of what Bobby Green was showing him in there, and couldn't really get to him with his strikes, couldn't really close the distance to initiate his grappling. And look at it. It ended unfortunately for everybody, for Bobby Green, for Jared Gordon, and for the fans and everybody alike. Share your thoughts on that fight itself, Harry, how it was going before the stoppage happened. The stoppage was completely justified. It was a great job. No contest is the correct call. Don't like the fact that, Bobby Green was out there kind of saying that he didn't get his win money. That's a shame for an unfortunate incident like that, and I don't like seeing that too. But your thoughts on the fight first, please, Harry.
Sure. So Bobby Green's a bit of a nightmare to deal with, really. Like, when you're a more conventional fighter, the idea is that you protect. We've already talked about center line in the last one, but you protect your center line because that's what your chin is. Right. Very often you can take shots on sort of the top of your head, your forehead, around your eye sockets. You could take shots there now and again. But if you take a shot, what they call is on the button, right? And there's an area of your chin sort of around the front of your mouth. And if you take a shot there, generally that's what does the damage to shut your body off. Right now, you could obviously get hit in the temple or behind the ear, and all of these are soft spots as well. But when they're talking about on the button, they mean at the end of the chin. And so when you're protecting your center line, the idea is you're protecting that portion of your chin from everything, right? Hooks, uppercuts, straights, everything. Bobby Green's like, I don't do any of that, actually.
Yeah.
I stick my chin out in front of me, and it's the most protruding thing. It's in front of my lead foot and everything. And he fights with his hands down, as you say. His shoulders are out and broad, which again isn't really a common thing. His footwork style is awkward. Excuse me. He's very jagged. He doesn't step into the pocket cleanly or smoothly. He's just a really, really difficult style to try and figure out, because his shots, then, as you already said, he fights with his hands down, so they're already from the hips. You don't know whether it's an uppercut, a hook, or a straight that's coming at you. You can't really tell from the elbow position or the shoulder position which one's coming. And equally, he often doesn't throw conventionally sound shots either. He throws hammer fists from awkward angles, or he just tries to drop knuckles on you in any way, shape, or form that he can. But I felt like and this actually was a fight of chalk and cheese. If you don't know what that phrase means, I've heard that's an English phrase, and I apologize if so. It's basically two polar opposites. Yeah, I'm sure you have. Yeah, I'm talking about the audience, right? But like chalk and cheese essentially is two completely different fighters. Jared Gordon is exactly the opposite to Bobby Green. Wants to put himself together very conventionally, shoulders tucked, chin down, hands together, feet spliced, nice striated stance on him, grand. Gordon did a good job of going to his fundamentals to deter Bobby Green. And what that was the first strike that lands is a low kick. And Bobby Green immediately is off balance and looked at him like, what did you do that for? We're supposed to be doing fighting things. And if I'm Jared Gordon, that's the well I'm going to. That's the way you beat fighters like Bobby Green. When they're unconventional in their footwork, there's a reason why footwork is conventional. And it's because it's tried and tested and it works. And that's not to say, obviously, that unconventional fighters don't exist and can't have success. But go and watch somebody like an Israel Adesanya. Go and watch somebody like a Conor McGregor. Their footwork, whilst having unorthodox flex to it, is extremely conventional in the way that they put it together. And it's because it works. And so when you chop at the legs of somebody that is unconventional, it makes them question their own footwork. And it straightens them up a little bit. And it starts to give you access to everything else. Jared Gordon struggled to keep loading up with those low kicks and knew that he had to be defensively aware and knew that he had to be on his P's and Q's for when Bobby Green was going to come in. Couldn't really find his way back into the middle of the octagon. Did a couple of nice explosions into space, but Green's footwork and pressure was always managing to push him back relatively soundly. Now, the win bonus thing, we could talk about that in a second, but the actual finish, I'll just read the notes I have coming up to the finish, is at 0:49. Clean work from Jared Gordon. He manages to find a way to keep the range. As Green feints to come inside with a shoulder dropping step, Gordon switches through, stepping to a right hand and coming with the left. Green's feet are together and it's easy pickings. That, to me, was the best moment for Jared Gordon. It was that moment at 0:49 just before he gets finished and the very, very start when he lands low kicks. He's starting to find the reads. He's starting to find the timing. He's tentative. He's hesitant for obvious reasons when you're fighting a style like Bobby Green, but he'd managed to start to make some inroads. And yet, 0:35 left on the clock. This is the unfortunate nature of Bobby Green and the headbutt. The unorthodox nature of the style means that pocket entrances are often uncalculated. Bobby just wants to enter the pocket and lands hands on you. He doesn't really calculate how he's going to get there. He just moves himself into the space. The left hand comes in from Bobby Green and he leads with his head. His head is almost at the same width away from his body as the left hand is. That's already problems because Jared Gordon does what he has to do, and he's begun to dip his head to the inside space to stop the left hand from catching him, and so gets caught flush on the side of the head with the headbutt. Goes down, whatever, takes some shots. I've no problem with the stoppage. I've no problem with the ruling of a no contest, but this is the type of thing you're going to have when you fight a guy like Bobby Green.
Yeah, like with Bobby Green and his style, I think you explained it perfectly there. Like when you're coming up against a guy like that, Harry, it absolutely infuriates you, really, to be honest. And I think the biggest battle is trying to stay mentally stable in those, because when you have an unorthodox guy like Bobby Green with his hands down and his chin up in the air, he's trying to goad you into throwing your big shots. He's trying to frustrate you and take you out of your game so he can counter you. Like Bobby Green is looking to counter Jared Gordon here, and I think he does that so well. But the interesting thing about this fight, as you said, is Jared Gordon was starting to find some success, and I was super interested as this round was coming to a close to see what Jared Gordon was going to bring into rounds 2 and round 3, because while he wasn't, look, he was likely on road to lose round 1, I still think he was well in the fight because he was starting to figure out Bobby Green. He was starting to cut off the cage as well. And look, it's an unfortunate end. And I think the best and the safest thing to do here is, number one, make sure that these guys get their win bonus if it's an accidental headbutt. Number 2 is let's stick them in there again and let's see what happens in the rematch, because it was an intriguing fight and one that we didn't really get too much closure on. And And let's move on to Jasmin Lucindo, who we got plenty of closure on. She went out there, won a unanimous decision over Brogan Walker. She climbed to 14-5. And, you know, Harry, the women's 125-pound division in the UFC is slowly but surely becoming to one of the most talented divisions inside the UFC, with the talent that we've coming into the top 15 and the talent that we already have in the top 15. And Jasmin Lucindo went out there. I think she's going to face tougher challenges than Brogan Walker, but she ticked off a lot of boxes out there on Saturday night.
I'm going to disagree.
Ooh.
So, my read of this fight was, and we can get into the actual notes I have, but my overarching read of this fight is Lucindo just clearly got power in her hands, clearly can crack, but the main issue I have is she is what I call a reactive fighter. So she's not pushing forward, setting up shots, landing shots. In most of the exchanges in the first and second, she waits for Brogan Walker to throw something. And after she's thrown something, she then comes in with a flurry of 4 to 5 shots. Now, the problem with that is what we saw in the fight. The problem with that is if you're fighting an opponent and they see that you're being tentative and hesitant and you're not throwing much, well, then one of you has to take the initiative. And so Brogan Walker took the initiative in the first round and began to throw. Well, she learned very quickly that you get smacked up when you've thrown something, whatever it is. And so Brogan Walker goes back to her corner after the first round and says, why am I going to throw again? Like, why would I throw with this ferocity? Why would I throw with this volume if I know that she's just going to come back and land 4 to 5 shots regardless? And so we get to this position where Brogan Walker doesn't want to throw. And Lucindo if this is part of the game plan where you show your opponent, if you throw, I'm going to come back 4 to 5 times harder and 4 to 5 times more. And that puts them in this awkward stalemate position where they don't want to throw because they're going to get countered, but they know that they have to throw to win. Great. Because if you then push on, take the front foot, take the advantage, go out there, start putting the pressure on, fantastic. But she doesn't, and she didn't. And so whilst in the third, I was really impressed with some of the takedown stuff. I was really impressed that we saw some versatility and some variety from her. I need to see some forward pressure, some actual going and taking the fight to her fighter. Spinning back kicks, spinning elbows, spinning back fists, whatever. As we saw in the second round, Brogan Walker has taken 3 of them, and so times the 4th one, comes underneath, gets to a double under position. Should she have got her down? Yes, absolutely she should have. She should have used that position and capitalized better on it. But those are the moments, right? Those are the moments that a better fighter than Brogan Walker is going to see those shots coming from a mile away, put Lucindo on her back and keep her there for 5 minutes, beat her up a little bit, wear her down. And equally, a fighter that, unlike Brogan Walker, is going to be able to mix up some shots with a little bit more variety, maybe a touch more power, a touch more accuracy, is going to cause Lucindo problems. Because if somebody's just planted a clean right hand on you, you don't then have the wherewithal to throw your 3 to 4s. You know you need to reset just in case you get hit with something else. And the final argument I'll make on Lucindo, and again, we can go into the notes if you want, is she's headhunting 100% of the time. And so if I'm in somebody's camp that's a little bit higher up the division, I'm like, cool. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to smack our legs apart. Just keep cutting the legs, keep cutting the legs, keep cutting the legs, keep our range, keep cutting the legs, move our footwork out, and then we'll start going to the body. We know she's not going to do anything else but go to the head, so level changes are available always. There's promise there.
Yeah,
but again,
I think that's what I'm kind of focusing on a little bit. Look at her record. She moved to 14-5. But when you look and take a deep dive into Lucindo's record, look at, she fought a bunch of nobodies at the start of her career. So that record is a little bit padded, in my opinion. She's 21 years of age as well. So she's got a big ceiling. She's got some time to grow. And that's what I was looking at. Definitely mistakes there. Definitely, it was a kind of a fight, Harry. I'm wondering if you agree, where you felt that she could have pushed on a little bit more at any stage and got the finish. But maybe she was just looking to get that win under her belt. And it'll be interesting to see. 21 years of age, I think she's got tons of promise, got tons of work to do as well. And I mean, I'm not pushing her too far up in the division just yet. You know, she needs to probably another 2 or 3 fights around a similar kind of a test as Brogan Walker gave her. I was happy to see her show her well-roundedness in round 3 with the takedowns and stuff like that. She showed good power. But yeah, you're right. You're right. She needs a lot of work. But she's 21 years of age and she's got plenty of time to go to work. But we go back to the age-old argument. Is she going to be given the chance to develop correctly in the UFC? I'm not so sure. It'll be interesting to see what's next for her. Any other thoughts before we move on to Wells and Semelsberger?
No, I mean, I agree with you that at 21, you know, it's one thing to be 21 and to have this growth, to room to grow and all of this stuff, and you're absolutely right. But you also have to factor in that she's had 19 fights, and whether that's a padded record or not, a fighter of 19 fights should probably know who they are by now, right? I have an understanding of who they are. That's 19 fight camps. That's 19 times of off season. That's a consistent amount of fights for you to be in there and put things together. Now, as you say, there is a real thing where the UFC caliber drags up your game, otherwise you will sink. And so are we going to see some improvements? Almost certainly from her. But let's see them, you know?
100%. 100%. Jeremiah Wells beat Matthew Semelsberger by split decision. Strange fight, this one, because all 3 rounds were similar enough where Semelsberger came out, Harry, and landed and hurt Wells early in the round. But Wells was able to recover. Wells was able to get back up on top and land some damage of his own. And it was enough to see the judges win and give him a split decision in this fight. And, you know, you can't really argue too much with that at all. But, I mean, not one for the books, not one that we'll probably remember in months' time. But I remember it being fairly intriguing to see how the judges scored it on the night. And I think they got it right.
Yeah, this was a judging nightmare for me, actually.
It was so hard. I was like, I was curious more so to see how the judges scored it as opposed to like knowing who had won the fight myself.
Right. And from a pure analysis perspective, if you're Matt Semelsberger, he is used to being, you can tell he's used to being the strongest dude in the gym. And the strongest dude in his crop of training partners, he's used to being that guy. And then he meets Jeremiah Wells, who has so much power that as he drags Semelsberger down for a couple of double legs, he pulls him with so much ferocity that Jeremiah Wells takes himself off his own feet. Like, there is so much athleticism in Jeremiah Wells that Semelsberger, who's used to just being a bit of a train, right? When he gets going, there's so much heavy duty steel behind him, and there's so much just raw strength behind him that he's used to just running dudes over. And when he cracks Wells in the first exchange of the first round and the first exchange of the second round, his brain's like, well, boys, we're done here. I'm just going to run through this dude now. And yet Wells finds a way through 75% athleticism and 25% technique to get back on top. And I can imagine when he's on top of you, it is absolutely horrendous. In the end of the third, Semelsberger's looking for a triangle on Jeremiah Wells. And I'm not even sure you can triangle that guy. I'm just not sure. You're right that, you know, what we learned here is that if you're a freak athlete in MMA, you can go far, right?
Yeah.
Because Court McGee found out in Jeremiah Wells' last fight, and Semelsberger took a number of huge shots from Wells, and obviously vice versa. But if you're a superior athlete, you can go far. And I don't want to lay in on the judging because I don't know is the honest answer. But watching that, the questions were raised for me as to whether Semelsberger has done enough with those initial shots to take rounds.
Yeah, and I think I had a note here about maybe a little bit of lack of fight IQ for Semelsberger as well, where he had hurt Wells on the feet and followed him down as well. Whereas I feel if he had have maybe forced him to stand back up, he may have hurt him again, and that might have sealed the deal for him. Christos Giagos in the next fight got a wonderful left hook finish against Ricky Glenn. Harry, talk me through that finishing sequence.
I mean, this is semi-modern MMA versus archaic MMA, right? Like Ricky Glenn fighting in a southpaw stance, sort of edges his way forward, does a lot of recycling of sort of arm posts. It's not really punches. His arms are quite far away from his shoulders, quite outstretched. We talked earlier about defending your center line and how important defending your center line is. Well, go and watch the Ricky Glenn performance, because you'll see that whilst it's an interesting use of deterrent, because you obviously can't enter the pocket if you're Christos Giagos, because there's two arms in front of you, essentially. What it does do is it opens up all the space around the position that the fighter is in to land uppercuts, overhand rights, even straights down the middle. Or if you were to cut an angle, you have sort of a breadth of options in front of you. And Christos Giagos just manages to find the timing so early. I've written it here, 3:27. Yeah, Giagos has the timing. The slow recycle of arm frames from Glenn without the threat of anything real is not going to work in higher level MMA. Giagos is not a great fighter, but he knew that he just had to time Glenn's inching into range. And because the extension of the arms is so aggressive, shots are available over the top and up the middle. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it was fantastic finish in that fight. Lovely left hook. And there was another lovely left hook as well, which forced the severe spotlight on Montel Jackson this weekend. Went out there, hit Rani Yahya with a lovely left hook and finished with just some brutal ground and pound. Montel Jackson moves to 13-2 in the bantamweight division. He's quite a bit of trouble, this guy. He is. And I mean, the severe spotlight isn't shone on everybody and anyone. He really impressed you this weekend. Tell me what stuck out to you most in his performance and his victory.
He's just so calm in there. And that was the thing that's the most impressive. Like, there are things that we look for in fighters more than just the fighting to tell us sort of where a fighter is in their person. I'll use Lucindo as sort of a yardstick. Yes, 21 years of age, 19 fights, whatever it is. But you can tell in just the fervent nature of her footwork, in her stance, in the way she moves her body, in her feints, that there's a lot of energy in her body, right? A lot of energy that's in her mind. There's clearly an internal dialogue that's very chaotic inside her when she's fighting. Montel Jackson couldn't be further from that if he tried. Like, he went out there and he just glides around the octagon. He oscillates between jagged entrances, between stalking stances, just like you'd see a panther or a cheetah adopt. And then he slides out of range of low kicks. He times things coming in. The calm that he showed when Yahya manages to get to that single leg, which is exactly where Yahya wants to be. And just all of the defensive movements that Montel Jackson manages to put together, forcing Yahya to play bottom, forcing Yahya to go to a close guard of all things in modern MMA, forcing Yahya to move between looking for sweeps, looking for arm bars, having crushed him up against the cage for the significant period of time that he was on the ground. And then he'd seen the shot previously. Again, we talk about making reads. He'd seen the left hand because he knew Yahya was starting everything with low kicks. What have we said? You don't throw naked low kicks. You don't throw low kicks without setting them up because you're available to be countered. Montel Jackson saw it earlier in the fight, a couple of minutes in, and yet waits for his opportunity, knows it's going to come, knows he's got 15 minutes in there with this guy. And when he lands absolutely on the button. I didn't feel like there was a need for the ground and pound. Again, I've got not a vast amount of problem with it. There was only a couple of shots. That's fine. But the first left hook, Yahya is face planting. And if it wasn't for the right hook that lands right afterwards, he wouldn't have ended up on his back. He would have ended up face planted on the floor. And yet, I understand it. You have to fight until the referee tells you stop. He did that. That's fine. But the most, obviously I put this out in the spotlight more, and you can go and read it if you want to. But
Definitely go and read it.
when there is a fighter that can produce that level of calm, that stands out to me, regardless of the finish, regardless of the performance and how good it was. When you have a fighter that can produce that level of calm, that level of cerebral awareness and focus, and that level of being able to just execute in the moment that presents itself, that's impressive to me.
Very, very impressive to me as well. Cool, calm, and collected is how you finished out the spotlights this week, and that's exactly what Montel Jackson showed in that fight with Ronnie Yahya. And yeah, it'll be exciting to see what's next for him. Moving on down, we'll go through a couple of the last fights relatively quickly. Norma Dumont went out there, won a unanimous decision over Karol Rosa. I mean, if you're trying to get anybody excited about this fight in the women's 145-pound division, you didn't make it happen on Saturday night. That's for sure. This fight was terrible.
It just needed one of them to go out. Like in the first round, the referee made 2 stalling calls and then broke up a clinch, and it was then that they started to put their foot on the gas. Like Norma Dumont, in my opinion, from what I saw in the fight, was a better striker. She had a little bit more variety, a little bit more snap on that jab 1-2. I just needed her to throw a couple of leg kicks and set things up. I just needed a jab and a leg kick. I just needed her to square Karol Rosa up a little bit. But instead, we just saw random exchanges in the middle and some clinch exchanges. Not a great fight from either woman.
It was just like no one was willing to put the bit between their teeth and push forward. And we saw flashes of it. Look at it. Yeah, like you said, it took till the end stages of round 1 for them to open up on the feet. Dumont landed very heavily at the start of round 2. She opened up, but kind of went back into her shell. And it was Karol Rosa, who was then probably behind, and she knew she was behind in round 3, that did open up. And when she did, Harry, look what happened. She put Norma Dumont down. She probably won the third round by doing that. So it's like, I think both of these women will be looking back at that tape and they'll be disappointed with how they reacted. You know, if there was talks of this being a number 1 contendership fight, maybe that got into both of your women's heads. But frankly, based off those performances, even if we do think that Amanda Nunes isn't quite what she used to be, still more than enough to get either one of those 2 women out of there. And yeah, they kind of left it behind them a little bit. Norma Dumont took home the unanimous decision win there. Can't argue with it all that much. The next fight after this was absolute trash garbage. Mohammed Usman versus Junior Tafa. Lots of nothing happened in this fight. Usman was just laying on top of him, not landing a whole lot at all. I mean, I have one note from this fight, and it was a messy, ugly fight from the get-go. And I think that's all that needs to be said about that fight. You didn't even take the luxury of watching it or the displeasure of watching that fight. So we're going to move on. William Gomis versus Francis Fire Marshall. Very interesting and intriguing fight. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because I do feel that Francis Marshall will look back in this fight and ask himself, why did I not try my hardest to get this fight down sooner? Because what we seen at the end of the 3rd round was pure and utter dominance in the grappling department, and he almost had to finish with the rear naked choke at the end. Before that, William Gomis was brilliant. He did what he does best. He moves on the back foot well. He gets off his strikes. He has an awkward rhythm. You know, he's a tough fighter to fight against, but I think Francis Fire Marshall, he found the way to fight William Gomis, but he didn't find it until the later stages of round 3. And that stage, it was probably a little bit too late. It was a split decision. It was a close fight. William Gomis took it in the end. Your thoughts, please, Harry?
Yeah, I think the problem for Marshall was that he probably knew, or at least thought, and the game plan was probably to grapple a little. But you have to be so careful when you're grappling somebody with the footwork style of William Gomis, because you know that when you're trying to enter the pocket to even land shots, and he's clipping you, and he's away, and he's gone, and his footwork's not there, and he's constantly squaring his hips up, and constantly feinting, and constantly moving, and he's constantly cutting angles, and you're like, for fuck's sake, can you just stop for 1 minute so I can look to set something up here?
And I think
And
that's
Marshall,
why he sorry for interrupting you. I think that's what he kind of caught in, that kind of mentality, I think, may have cost him in the fight, where he was literally, for fuck's sake, I can't catch this guy's timing. I can't figure out his footwork. And he kind of got stuck trying to figure out that puzzle when he kind of realized in round 3, oh, wait, now I can actually close him off against the cage here, and I can take him down, and I can be really dominant in the grappling stages. But easier said than done, of course. When Gomis is moving in and out, he's getting tireder as the fight goes on as well. So his footwork wasn't quite as there as it was in the earlier stages of the fight too, which probably made it easier for Francis Marshall as well. But yeah, continue on, please, Harry. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. You feel free to jump in whenever you want. But I think this is my point, right? This is a learning fight for both guys, right? William Gomis needs to be able to replicate round 1 across 2 more rounds, and then again potentially across 2 more rounds after that, because what we see here is a fantastic fighter in round 1, a guy that's elusive, hits well, lands with variety, lands from all different types of positions. That's fine. But if at round 3, you're in a belly down, rear naked choke, literally trying to survive, that's not the one, because Francis Marshall is 7-0. And when they put you in the next guy that's a little bit better than Francis Marshall, you may not manage to survive that rear naked choke. You may not manage to find yourself out of the belly down position. And so if I'm Francis Marshall, I think you're right. One thing that he's going to learn from this fight is to just have confidence in his abilities earlier, to not necessarily try to beat a fighter at his game plan, but instead to just try to dominate, overwhelm, and implement his own game plan. And that's something, he's 7-0. Like, he's a child in this game still, really, right? And so this is an amazing fight for him to take away. And he could say, okay, well, look, I have the data. Round 1, I can see it was a close enough round, right? But William Gomis won it. That's fine. I got no problem with that. But clearly, I am trying to fight him at his own game. Round 3, his coaches are like, you just need to go out and do you again. Goes out, does him, finds himself deep in a rear naked choke, and he'll probably be questioning how he didn't finish it, frankly. But we are where we are.
100%. I thought the fight was over at this stage, and I think he'll be disappointed that he didn't. Maybe his arms were gone a little bit, but it looked like it was fairly rock solid on at stages, Harry. If you were in that position too, would you have done anything differently?
Yes. So the difference I had is, from a belly down rear naked choke, I would opt to be using a lot more hip pressure, to be driving the hips in and arching the back. So you're pulling the back through the choke. You're pulling the neck through the choke. So you're actually using less of your arms and you're using more of your hips, right? So because he had the rear naked choke locked up, but Gomis had an ability to grab the was it the left? I think it was his left, the left glove, I think. No, it wasn't inside the glove or anything. He was just grabbing the glove. And at this point, you need to be closing your elbows together rather than pulling through the neck. And closing your elbows together will hide that left hand more and more. Now, obviously, that's difficult because Gomis' hand is in the way. But what you can also do is let go of that right hand, strip the left grip. He's belly down, right? So he has to make 2 choices. You're either, when you're driving that hip pressure through, you're either saying, okay, you either don't escape here and you fight the rear naked choke, or you escape by addressing your hands on the mat and moving your body. And so if you're Francis Marshall, just oscillate between the two. Pin him with your hips, driving that back to the mat, driving his hips to the mat, pulling his back up, and just start moving between the choking variations, stripping the top grip, because he had time. It wasn't as if this was 8 seconds. He finds a rear naked choke and he has to finish it right now. He had time. And Gomis was tired. Obviously, he was tired himself, but he was in such a dominant position. The other option I would give him is just abandon the rear naked choke, drop your hips in and land shots. Because belly down back mount, in my opinion, is the most dominant position in MMA right now. And I would love to see fighters use it more often. I would love to.
Yeah, very good point. And I think on top of all of that, it kind of showcases a little bit of a hole that the MMA factory have in the jiu-jitsu department, as well, as we've seen with Cyril Gane earlier in the year with John Jones. Last but not least, Danaa Bakary, Danaa, whatever way you want to call him, basically just thrown this fight away. An absolutely dominant second round. Looked like he was on the home and hose, but it kind of gassed himself out a little bit. Brady Hiestand came in there and capitalized, showed some great heart because he took a hell of a beating in round 2 there. But I mean, not too much to say about this. I think back that Danaa kind of gassed himself out a little bit in round 2, going for the finish. Came very, very close. You've got to credit Brady Hiestand's heart and determination to get the job done. The stoppage was more of a whimper than anything else. I think Danaa was looking for a way out, and the referee gave him a way out. It wasn't really that impactful of a finish, but he didn't look like he had the means to defend himself intelligently as well. Any thoughts on that fight before we wrap it up, Harry?
I think we can sum this fight up in a sentence, and that's: when you have your fighter hurt, take your time.
100%. And that will be a lesson that Danaa will take coming out of this fight. Was up 2 rounds and was up 2017 on Ron McCarthy's card before this fight was stopped. So he really, really left that behind. And we'll leave this card behind us as well. It's all done and dusted. Sergei Pavlovich, Curtis Blaydes, the first balance breakdown on the SevereMMA YouTube channel. Hope you enjoyed it. We will be back every Tuesday to break down UFC cards, take a look at maybe some other things as well, if not too much has happened. But it's been a pleasure, Harry. The first one is in the books. We'll be back again. Check out all things on SevereMMA. We are on the lead up to Cage Warriors Dublin. Got a bunch of interviews, bunch of coverage. The lads will be up there covering it live. Me and Harry will be watching it from afar. Maybe we'll have a little bit of a chit chat about a couple of fights on that on next week's balance breakdown. But until then, thank you all for watching. We'll talk to you soon.